TopMedTalk.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk Down Under. I'm Kate Leslie and I'm here with my co-host Andy Cumpstey at the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists and Faculty of Pain Medicine annual scientific meeting in Brisbane. It's the largest anaesthesia meeting in our region. And we had a great session just before the Gilbert Brown Prize.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the major scientific prize of meeting. And we'll find out tomorrow which emerging research leader won the prize. Now, you've won one of these prizes, Andy, in the UK.
The UK equivalent. Yes. So we have our National Institute for Academic Anaesthesia in the UK, or the NIAA, and that holds a national research award every year, which asks for early career researchers to submit a body of work. So it doesn't have to be a PhD thesis, but it can be a PhD thesis. It has to be more than one paper, but it has to be a body of work which is submitted. And it's quite a grueling thing to do. You go to quite a large research meeting and present a very strictly timed 10-minute presentation, and you get very strictly timed 10 minutes of questions, and then you find out who wins the prize at the end of that. It's very like what I've just watched many of your LAs doing in this fantastic ceremony, but you're also a former winner of this prize, aren't you, Kate?
Oh, back in the last millennium, Andy.
That's not true. Very modest.
So now we've got two fantastic guests to continue our conversation about global health. Tell us a bit about yourself, Mandy.
I'm Mandy Baric. I work as an anaesthetist in Melbourne, in Australia. And I got invited to go to Mongolia by a colleague who works in our department, and the Associate Professor, David Pescott, who's an amazing global health doctor, and he has been involved in global health for a long time. And when he turned around to the office one day and said, Mandy, I need a hand in 2006. I need a hand for you to come and help me teach obstetric anaesthesia in Mongolia. And the first thing I said was, why me? And I was quite a junior consultant at the time, but it was such a great opportunity. So I've been involved with education mostly in global health, and of course a little bit of service, but not very much. Most of it's actually been in theatre teaching or in the obstetric ward type teaching, and a lot of it has been involved in developing curriculum and rolling that out, in particular in Mongolia, but I've certainly had some time in Romania, Croatia and in Myanmar.
It's amazing, Mandy, it really is, because before David Pescott and yourself got involved in anaesthesia in Mongolia and the education of anaesthesia providers, what was the situation like?
Let's just say we were in 2006, we felt like we'd gone back in time to a situation that was at least 20 years behind where we were at that time. They had quite a different health system. It was, I believe, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but it's the Shemasko system that the Russians had left behind. And of course, they became a democracy in 1989 after the end of communism. And what was left was a large number of buildings and hospitals across a country that was very sparsely populated. It was the most sparsely populated country in the world, with a small population, about 2 million at the time. A large number of them, or about half of them, were in the capital, in Newby, and a few scattered around the countryside.
Ulaanbaatar, for those who are not in the know.
It was... The system was designed to enable accessible healthcare all around the country, but in fact what actually happened was that the hospitals and the health centres were not very well staffed, and in fact sometimes not staffed at all, often with no running water or electricity, even in the capital at the time, intermittent electricity supply. And so there were only 30 medical anaesthetists in the country, and to my surprise they all turned up to our little obstetric anaesthesia update in 2006, and were really so easy to work with. And I think that's been one of the things that have been beautiful about going to Mongolia, is because, I don't know about you, but Kate, I don't find it very easy to change things in my own department, let alone a whole country, particularly when I'm looking at trying to improve the system or improve training, or, even just change the equipment that we use.
Well, you seem to be slightly good at it, because the president of Mongolia gave you the highest civilian honour, the Polar Star, which is just so terrific. For the American listeners, that's like the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Or for British listeners, it's like being Dame Amanda Baric.
Yes,
that's got a ring to it.
Yeah, except Dame sounds a little bit older. I won't go there. I won't reveal how old I am, but clearly I'm middle-aged. So
everybody's young on TopMedTalk.
That's true. In my head, I'm still 35. Yes, I'm 35.
And in the outstanding plenary we had this morning, Mandy, we heard that the challenges, actually a lot of this was in Mongolia as well, wasn't it? But the challenges in this region is workforce, and not only workforce. So tell us a bit more about the not only workforce challenge. What are some of the other challenges that are faced out there?
Well, I guess a lot of it is about the systems that people work in, and a lot of it is about relationships with their own governments and governing bodies, particularly with regulators, and about getting access to medication. That sort of was certainly talked about this morning. There is a problem now with halothane, or there will be a problem with halothane access around the world now that we don't have a manufacturer. And it's an essential medicine. And a lot of parts of the world really can't deliver safe anaesthesia without those basic medications. We had the same situation with ketamine a few years ago. And so that we've done a fair bit of advocacy to try and improve medication access. Certainly in the countries I've worked with, that I believe we've empowered the doctors that are there to then go and take up their own shortfalls with their governing bodies and their suppliers.
And just to recap on that, is that shortfall a supply line issue or is it a manufacturing issue?
Well, at the moment, the problem with halothane will be with manufacturing. But in the part when we started going to Mongolia, for instance, there was a time that we couldn't work out why they weren't reversing their patients, for instance, after the patient received muscle relaxation with their stigma, and we discovered that they just didn't have it. So that was just that was a supply issue.
I think that's another really interesting sort of transferable skill or benefit from doing this sort of work, because I mean, it might surprise some of our listeners to hear that, in the UK's National Health Service, we have got regular supply and manufacturer issues at the moment. You're probably the same here in Australia, I suspect, that as manufacturing pressures are changing and commercial pressures are changing, fewer and fewer factories are making these agents, and it only takes one factory to go down. All of a sudden, that's the only factory making that agent, and that drug doesn't exist anymore. So I'm really intrigued how you've managed to help kind of work around that issue in some of these lower resource countries, because we're still struggling to work around that issue in what we think is a much higher resource country in the UK.
I'm not sure that I've sold anything there, but so really all we've been able to do is help identify the medications that have been in short supply for them, perhaps suggest some alternatives if required, or to change the practice that they were doing to help deal with the fact that there was no, particularly the reversal agent, what they could do, and also to understand how they could make that safe or safe enough.
So we'd like to bring in our other guest, an old friend to the podcast now. Deb, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, so my name's Debra Devonshire. I'm an anaesthetist in Melbourne, Victoria. I have some strong links with the College of Anaesthetists through council and CPD. And I've also spent time in Mongolia with Mandy, and we're about to go again.
So what's it like? How do you fly there? Where do you stay? What do you wear? What do you eat? What's it like?
Well, all of those things you've mentioned are reasonably challenging, I would have to say. So I've flown through Seoul, I've flown from Berlin, I've flown through Hong Kong, and all of those experiences have been interesting. Also flown through Beijing. So Mandy does the full all the way through in one go. But I've always stopped just for a day or two just to sort of make sure my bags aren't lost, and then flown Miet, which is their official airline. Food for me has been challenging because I don't eat meat. It's a landlocked country, so I'm generally have my Vegemite in my bag and I mix it up with stale bread, yak cheese, fermented milk, a whole lot of things like that. And they have a very meat-based diet. So usually there's a bloke with a giant knife in the back of his sash and he pulls it out and sort of cuts up a whole lot of leg bones, and then they crack it and eat the marrow if you're out in the rural areas. In the urban part of Ulaanbaatar, though, it's pretty easy to find something to eat, especially in summer.
And what's it like working with the local Mongolian specialists and educators?
They are the smartest people. they have really good uptake of new ideas. Obviously, it has to be adapted to the environment, which is what Mandy was saying. So there's no use teaching something that you would do to somebody who doesn't have the same resources. So I found that a kind of pretty steep learning curve when I went there. I was like, oh, well, I'd just do it like this. And then you realise, well, that's actually really silly because that's not within the framework or the resources that they have. And so it's about adapting what you think is the most safe way to practice anaesthesia within the environment that you're in. But as far as being adaptable and smart and having great uptake, I found them extraordinary.
So what's their go-to technique, or what are you teaching them for difficult intubation in adults? Like, I reach now for the CMAC and, it always works.
Well, I was speaking to Mandy. They've now got some video laryngoscopes.
Yeah, you'll be pleased to know that the COVID pandemic helped them out. So their government had funded the purchase of video laryngoscopes for all their government hospitals. So that has now been revolutionary for them. After the hiatus, we weren't able to travel during COVID, of course, but there was some virtual education, and we certainly invited them to some of the college and society activities, which was very helpful. So I'd like to shout out to those people who helped them out. But when we arrived last year for the first time since the pandemic, we discovered that there were a whole bunch of video laryngoscopes with a supplier that was close by in China. So they now have the video laryngoscopes. But prior to that, let's just say the intubation technique was a little bit tricky for them. Traditionally, they had used lots of regional anaesthesia and spinals for most of their surgeries. In fact, one of the first times David and I went to an operating room, we saw a spinal anaesthetic being administered for an appendectomy, which I don't think I'd ever seen before, and certainly not in our own environment.
No.
We'd be doing a general anaesthetic and a small amount of bupivacaine in the spinal mixed up with the dextrose and head down and off you go. Fortunately, their surgeons had learned how to do lots of operations very swiftly. And I think that's true of lots of places where anaesthesia provision is not that reliable. I suspect we may have spoiled our surgeons a little bit. I don't know about you, Kate. They tend to take a bit longer, and they certainly take advantage of the fact that anaesthesia is quite safe in our country.
So you've told us quite nicely about what the conditions are like when you get to these places. How long are you going to these places for, typically? How long is one of these?
Not long.
Few days, few weeks?
Usually about 1 or 2 weeks. I think the longest I've spent there has been 2 weeks. But
right.
There's been more than one sort of group of people going every year.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this year, I think Dave Pescott is going in a couple of weeks to roll out the VAST course for them. This is a new simulation course.
What does VAST stand for?
Cannot tell you exactly, so I do apologise, but I know it's a simulation training program based out of Canada.
Right.
So they're teaching them how to do, initially I think it was to teach how to do emergencies in anaesthesia type thing, a bit like we used to have with our EMAC course, Kate. And then it's evolved into other areas, including leadership and safety. So Dave is going for, I think it's a week or so in May, and then we're going in June. And actually, before we go, there's a group of emergency physicians going. We introduced emergency medicine a few years ago. I think Deb had to teach about, was it you teaching about snake bite?
That's David. No, actually, snake bites are big in Australia. Had lots of pictures of venomous snakes. One other thing I learned from the emergency courses was that you get this two-way feedback from the Mongolians. So, I think it was Rod and I were, giving our all, teaching about sort of major hemorrhage. And then we kind of threw it back to the group we were working with, and we found out that they were looking after women with postpartum hemorrhage in a GER in the middle of nowhere with limited resources, and one of the anaesthetists will basically sit by the woman's side. So a GER is like one of those round tents on a very barren plain with, and she would be too sick to move to the regional centre. And so they would, take a little bundle out there, put in the IV, run fluids, run whatever products they could get, which was generally not very much. And And we were just sitting there with our mouths open saying, here we are sort of trying to teach you how to look after major hemorrhage, and you're actually showing us, what you can do in extremely difficult situations.
So I think that feeds quite nicely back into one of the themes we've had throughout these conversations to this conference. It's that power of conversation and that networking between different groups. But it feels like when you go in these missions or trips, it's that two-way education that's really happening. It's not
100%.
You doing the skills for them. It's not them. It's a two-way joint education thing, and therefore that teaching is probably the most important skill for someone who wants to do this work, to have that delivery of education and teaching skills. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, having some ability to have that two-way conversation about what the best management might be, and putting everything into some sort of regional context.
And how are these trips paid for? Are you paying for this for yourselves in annual leave? Is it funded through other resources, and you're doing lots of fundraising on the side as well? How?
Out of our pocket usually. And look, it's actually not that difficult because most of the time when we go in June, we run their annual meeting. So it's a presentation at a society meeting. So it's actually more than just a presentation. We put it together. We get all the speakers together. We deliver the material. We'll deliver the workshops. We'll go and visit the hospitals and do some in-hospital stuff.
You say that like it's obvious, but I suspect not many people listening to this will realise that you're not just paying for this yourselves, but giving up your own annual leave for this.
Oh, yeah, and the response that goes before.
Yeah, and all the hard work
together. Yeah,
absolutely.
But, a lot of that has been, some of that's been shifted to the Mongolians for them to own that a little bit. But yeah, actually it helps to go and visit the hospital first, because then you know what they're doing and work out that actually they don't have any fractionated blood, or they often will just have FFP. Bougies, yeah. Actually, I've been seeking some donations from the States, and some of the companies here have been very generous.
So someone mentioned leadership, and today's been a big day for leadership by women. We had the Women in STEM breakfast, and we're all going off to a WELI session, Women's Empowerment Leadership Initiative, shortly. And I was reflecting on the great leadership by you two women in the space of global health, which has been had a lot of men doing great work in it. What's it been like being women leading in the global health sphere?
Do you want to go first?
No, I think you should go first.
Well, to be honest, I often don't feel like a woman in a leadership position. I feel like part of a team. And despite the fact that you are exhibiting leadership skills, the gender thing often doesn't come into my head. So, I mean, I can be on a committee, and I don't actually think, oh my goodness, there's like 2 women here and 10 men. I think one of the advantages to medicine is often that you're dealing with men who have got a little bit higher EQ often, and I think perhaps in some other environments that may not be the case. I think for us in Mongolia and in our travels and just in general, sort of when we've worked together, for me personally, I don't feel like we are specifically sort of, raising a big stick and sort of, being a leader in that sort of way. I think it's more of a collaborative sort of leadership approach. And I think obviously in a leadership position, the best thing you can do is pull all of the essential ingredients of the team that you're working with, and allow that sort of diversity of ideas to sort of, foster sort of solutions to where you want to go, and whether that's on in a difficult environment with limited resources, or whether it's in a resource-rich environment. I think they're the positive things that women, I think, have a pretty intuitive way of managing those situations.
It sounds a little bit like what I'm going to say this afternoon about research, is that if you create a critical mass of women and develop the camaraderie and the collegiality, then the gender issues tend to go away and it's more of a big team. Would you agree, Mandy?
Yeah, I think you're right there, Kate. We kind of almost ignore the fact that there are loads of women in that group of people that travel. In fact, we have quite a diverse group of people that travel, different cultures. I've asked loads of people to go to Mongolia, and they've come from all different parts of the world, and they've been very generous with their time. And when you're working, as Deb said, in a team, you don't really notice that yourself. I think one of the things that is helpful is to get connected with the people that you're working with. that's been one of the strengths of what we had been doing in both Mongolia and Myanmar. Deb has forgotten that she's been to Myanmar as well, I think. And one of the things that we were able to do is connect with the local hosts. So I think understanding people and just asking the questions and letting them speak to you about who they are and what they do has been really important.
One of the nice things we saw in the plenary this morning was, so TopMedTalk is originally and still is the broadcasting of evidence-based perioperative medicine. We've now got pretty good evidence that this incredible work you're doing is having really good outcomes, hasn't it? It's really changed in the time you've been working there. Do you want to talk us through some of the figures and things we saw?
I was actually astounded looking at the presentation. There was a presentation this morning from Rob McDougall from WFSA, and he showed the statistics of improvement in outcomes in Mongolia from 2016 until present day. And I thought to myself, I wonder how much of a role we've actually helped play in improving the education of, anaesthetists and surgeons and that whole perioperative medicine team. And it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. I thought, wow, I think we actually made a really significant difference.
It doesn't feel like it when you're doing things. Like, you don't notice things changing. And it's only when somebody else has a look at it and says, well, have a look. There it is.
So what happens
is providers.
You went from having 1 or 2 specialist anaesthetists per, I think it's 100,000 people, to having over 5. So it's a 5-fold increase. And over 5 is thought to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's when anaesthetists can go from just being on the tools the whole time to doing admin, research, quality improvement. And now they have a perioperative medicine prehab clinic in Ulaanbaatar.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that because last year, and I have to say how quickly that happened. I believe that happened just in less than 12 months.
It only took the College of Anaesthetists nearly 18 years.
Yeah, well, there you go. And it is helpful to work with a smaller group of people.
Well, I think on that note, Andy, we should hurry off to our next session.
So thank you very much for your time and coming on to join us today on TopMedTalk. As always, you can find this conversation on our website, through our app, through the conference newsletters. We're also available on Facebook, on X or formerly Twitter. And we should also say thank you very much to Southampton, who've been busy making coffee throughout this podcast and banging away in the background. They're formerly known as 3M Healthcare, and we're very grateful for all the sponsorship they've given us here at ANZCA this year. Thank you very much. Let's have the power of conversation.
Thank you.
TopMedTalk. Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe, check us out on YouTube, and of course on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook and X. Also, it's important to remember that TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is ebpom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. ebpom.org.